Chapter 18. First to Fall.
January 8th, 1969, 11:24 a.m.
Laura Knott worked the 7 a.m. shift, inconspicuous and tucked away in the glass-enclosed FBI radio room. Having just returned from lunch, she was eager to finish the day and get home. She stashed her handbag in the metal desk drawer and slid the chair closer to her desk. Strategically arranged at her station were several radios, scanners, and telephones necessary to stay informed to the goings-on in the FBI, Metropolitan Police Department, and with various high-level federal personnel. Laura Knott's sole responsibility was to dispense information. She was friendly, but no nonsense when it came to her position, understanding how important a role she played within the Bureau. Two agents passed by the glass on the way to the elevator and waved. "Hey, Pete," they said in unison. The boys in the office never called her Laura. Everyone always referred to her as Pete. Laura did not know why, but she never attempted to correct it. She liked being one of the guys. The agents' voices muffled through the glass, but Pete managed to return a distracted wave, her ears tuned to the MPD radio to what sounded like a bank robbery in progress. She confirmed the holdup, happening less than 5 minutes earlier, and pulled the microphone stand close to her mouth to broadcast the call. 91 new, she said with a radio announcer's diction. Bank robbery at Citizens Bank of Maryland, Indian Head Highway, Fort Washington. Pete delivered the announcement calmly. All cars respond. Agents returned the confirmations over the radio in rapid succession. Bank robberies were a priority. The unwritten rule at the WFO, whether or not you were on C1, was that you lent a hand. But if you were a part of the C1 squad, this was pure adrenaline. Barry Colvert, still on the other side of town, heard the call and identified his credential numbers to the radio room.
This is signal 6718 in service.
He was racing through traffic, wishing he had not been so far from the incident. Another response piggybacked. Clack was also on the north side of Washington, in between leads when he heard Pete's call. He knew he had to get back to the south side of the city right away.
7508 en route,
he responded.
11:36 a.m.
Edwin came to a red light at the bottom of Southview Drive, just down the hill from the apartment complex. He was crossing into the district at Southern Avenue when he heard the call on the radio. This time, Pete was broadcasting additional information regarding the robbery and the potential suspect, Billy Austin Bryant. The next voice Edwin heard was Barry Colvert, who arguably knew Bryant better than anyone. There was an audible tension in Colvert's voice.
His wife and children live on Yuma Street,
he said.
His mother is on K Street. Those are two places you should go and check.
Colvert was irritated that he was not close enough to go speak with either Mrs. Bryant himself. He pushed the accelerator.
I'm on my way.
This is 7502 in service, Edwin said on his car radio. I'm 2 minutes away. We'll check it out. His voice, slightly monotonic, masked the energy of his inner 8-year-old who relished chasing down the bad guys. He was finally involved in what he wanted most, an active bank robbery. After Bryant successfully escaped with $1,800, the MPD and FBI were able to interview bank employees. The branch supervisor, whose intuition led her to believe something was off, remembered the robber as Billy Austin Bryant and notified the Hyattsville and Baltimore field offices, who asked the WFO for assistance. She wondered why Bryant would target the Fort Washington branch when he had been a semi-regular customer there in the years before his incarceration. It didn't seem to make any sense, but she was relieved that no one at the bank was hurt. All witnesses described his getaway car as a late-model maroon Cadillac, license plate unknown.
11:39 a.m.
S.A. George Sullivan was working on an unrelated case in Anacostia with S.A. Anthony Palmisano as they listened to the radio call already in progress. They were close enough to Yuma Street to proceed in that direction. Edwin, the first agent on the scene, pulled up to 133 Yuma Street, a modest 3-story brick dwelling where the block ended. He appeared to be the only person visible in the immediate vicinity, taking a moment to survey the area. Few parked vehicles, paint-chipped single-family clapboard houses on one side of the street, a couple of apartment buildings on the left. The Yuma Street address sat adjacent to a vacant lot, closest to the end of the road. Maybe it was the dead-end street. Perhaps it was the weather, but other than the leaves and random papers blowing with sudden gusts of wind, the block was lifeless, and the open field looked like the place where people go to bury secrets. An initial visual assessment turned up no sign of the getaway Cadillac. Edwin could hear George Sullivan in car 657 was on the way. He exited his own vehicle and leaned against the back end, waiting, somewhat impatiently, for his partners to arrive.
11:40 a.m.
Frazzled were Willie Bryant's nerves in seeing Billy Bryant in her home. Allowing a visit with his kids from time to time was one thing. Harboring a fugitive was something she just would not do. "Get out," Willie said. She was face to face with her runaway husband. His eyes were open wide. His breathing was labored and heavy, and his hair had afro-bushed from perspiration and the dampness in the air. He looked like a caged feral beast caught in a trap. "Hush your mouth," Bryant said. He paced the floor with the envelope of stolen money bulging in the back of his trousers. "I have to think." He would not allow his estranged wife to see the gun resting just underneath his sweater. The below-freezing temperature did not stop beads of sweat from dotting Bryant's forehead and dampening his shirt. He crouched, trying to peer down to the sidewalk through dark-colored shears hanging at the living room window. He was curious about the Negro fellow in the coat and hat, standing next to a suspicious black car. The fedora prevented Brian from getting a good look at Edwin's face, but he sensed he did not belong. Willie was adamant, yelling in a hushed tone, "I will not be a part of any of this, Billy." She picked up her coat. "I'm going to the store. When I get back, I need you to be gone."
11:42 a.m.
Car 657 reached the intersection of South Capitol and Atlantic Streets. George Sullivan called the radio room for more accurate directions. Edwin heard and responded, guiding them to the apartment building at 133 Yuma Street. They found Edwin's car and parked directly behind while observing him come from the back of the brick building believed to be the home of Willie Rabina Bryant. "Hey, George," Tony, Edwin said. "What's this one about?" Sullivan said. He and Palmisano had been covering a lead and missed the initial bulletin. Edwin brought them up to speed. "A robbery in PG County, the suspect identified as Billy Austin Bryant. Supposedly, the wife lives in this building. I just circled, and the entrance is over there on the side." He was pointing to a concrete walkway, which led up to a gray, gloss-painted step landing to the entrance. "Apparently, he used a red Cadillac, but I didn't see anything fitting that description around here. I was waiting for you guys to get here before I went inside." Billy Bryant pressed his body hard against the wall and moved his head to watch from the window upstairs. He spied the two white men joining the black man. They stood around for a couple of minutes. He determined that Edwin was doing most of the talking because he could see air coming from his mouth in the cold.
11:44 a.m.
The three agents stepped inside the split-level building and searched the mailboxes on the left wall. The name Bryant was handwritten on a white rectangular label, but the apartment number was missing. One of the boxes indicated a superintendent apartment down on the basement sublevel. They decided to start their investigation there. Yes? A young boy answered the door. Edwin took the lead. Is there a manager available? He's not in, the boy said. We're looking for Willie Bryant. Do you know her? Yes. Do you know which apartment she lives in? The boy hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should be giving out personal information, but these men made him nervous. She's in number 12, all the way upstairs at the top.
11:45 a.m.
Billy did not clue Willie in on what he was staring at, nor had he informed her he had just robbed a bank. She knew he was wanted from the prison escape and didn't want the law, Barry Colvert in particular, to think she had lied to them about her estranged husband's whereabouts. She wanted to be free of him. This was her chance, maybe her only chance. This man is looking for you. She handed him Barry Colvert's business card. Goodbye, Billy. Her distressed voice summoned courage as she wrapped the scarf around her neck and picked up her gloves. Though she was still in her 20s, her tumultuous life with him felt decades longer. Willie pulled the door shut with a light touch and headed down the stairs. Bryant neither looked in her direction nor uttered a word.
11:46 a.m.
The agents walked back upstairs from the manager's unit to interview Mrs. Willie Rabina Bryant. At the street-level entrance next to the mailbox row, they passed a woman descending the stairs and heading out to the street. Anthony Palmisano held the door open. Good morning, Edwin said. Morning, she answered. The woman never looked back. She had no reason to. These men were not familiar to her in any way. Besides, there were more important things on her mind as nervous feet carried her down the block. Edwin, Palmisano, and Sullivan continued up 2 flights of stairs to apartment 12. They had no photograph. They were completely unaware that they had just passed their person of interest in the stairwell and unsuspecting of the visitor who would greet them on the other side of the door.
11:47 a.m.
The building interior, a tight packed open area on each floor, utilized the same terracotta brick as the exterior, causing an echo as the 6 footsteps made their way to the 3rd floor. They ascended in a single file from the ground floor to the top, Woodruff first, then Palmisano, and Sullivan at the end. On the landing, they saw 5 metal doors, polystyrene core with steel skin overlay, painted gray with black trim to match the stairs and hallway flooring. The door facing them had no peephole. They determined it to be a storage unit of some kind. On either side of the storage were 2 apartments. On the left, unit numbers 9 and 10. On the right, closest to the stairs, unit 11, and cornered to the storage door, apartment 12. Even though they had come to interview Willie Bryant, they adhered to FBI procedure, taking the standard necessary precautions. They remained in the same order, Edwin being the closest to number 12 and Anthony Palmisano just to his right in front of number 11. George Sullivan stood further down, on the 2nd step facing the storage door and watching for movement below. Edwin reached out. His fist knuckled the door 3 times, while Tony simultaneously knocked using the door clapper. They stopped. The doorknob was turning from the inside.
11:49 a.m.
Billy Austin Bryant, nerves on high alert and formulating the next move, heard them as they moved upstairs. He removed the safety from his derringer and placed his left hand on the doorknob, his right hand holding the gun, out of sight, next to his thigh. Through the peephole, he could see the Negro from the street, the one with the hat, and a slight image of the other 2 white men. He thought they might have seen him watching from the window. He now knew the decision to come here was misguided, but it was the closest familiar place to the bank, less than 7 miles straight up on Indian Head Highway. It took him roughly 9 minutes to flee the scene and to get to Willie's place, ditching the car a few blocks from Yuma and going the rest of the way on foot. Now, the man whose mirrored reflection revealed a lifetime of poor decisions faced the ultimate choice: fight or flight. He thought back to how it felt when handcuffs wrapped around his wrist when Barry Colvert and Louis Blancato caught him at Althea's place. He remembered what he did wrong and what he would do differently. He believed his mistake lay in his hesitation to act quickly, to fire his gun immediately, and to be a hunter instead of being the hunted. He vowed it would never happen again.
11:50 a.m.
Willie Bryant's door opened partway, about 2 inches, enough for the 3 agents to see a Negro male on the other side of the door. "Is Mrs. Willie Bryant home?" Edwin asked. Bryant flipped a blasé response. "No, she is not," he said. "She's left." Edwin stepped closer to the door. "What is your name?" "Freeman," Bryant lied. Edwin remained collected. "I am Special Agent Woodruff with the FBI." He pointed to his 2 colleagues. "These are Agents Palmisano and Sullivan. May we talk to you for a minute?" Bryant tried to feign disinterest. "The apartment is not mine," he said. "I cannot let anyone in without the lady being here." Sweat dripped from his hairline. From behind the door, his right hand quivered and crept up the side of his leg, reaching waist level, and paused until he was able to switch his arm position and snap the weapon forward. Instantly, the barrel of the gun poked through the open door and met the eyes of Special Agent Edwin Woodruff, who had but a millisecond to realize his fate. Bryant's finger squeezed the trigger, and with God's name, the final word from his lips, Edwin drew his last breath and fell to the ground.
11:51 a.m.
George Sullivan saw the first flashes of light spit through Edwin's head and neck, accompanied by the deafening cracks and smell of gunpowder filling the hallway. He immediately drew his service revolver and returned fire at the opening. His bullets both hit and ricocheted against the metal-encased door. Bryant shot with incredible speed, his next round meant for Sullivan, but the bullet whizzed over George's head. Sullivan attempted to get to the door and kick it in. Bryant slammed it shut. There was a brief silence. Sullivan heard a groan and turned to see Special Agent Anthony Palmisano in agony, collapsing next to Edwin's side.
11:53 a.m.
George Sullivan, the 34-year-old senior in the group, found himself alone with 2 fallen agents and a killer on the other side of the door. He was frantic, trying to alert someone, banging on every door and yelling for help. He ran back to the 3rd floor and saw Tony's eyes open. "I'm hurt bad," Palmisano choked. "Get some help." "I am, Tony. I am," Sullivan promised. "Hang on." Anthony Palmisano forced a deep staccato inhalation and exhaled a slow, fading breath. He called his mother's name and closed his eyes. Sullivan barreled down the stairs and bumped into an elderly black man who wanted to find out if there was indeed gunfire in his hallway. The man screamed and became incoherent as the 2 bodies lying on the landing came into his view. He ran back inside his apartment and Sullivan ran outside to his car.
11:55 a.m.
There was a great deal of noise and chatter over the 2-ways and scanners in the FBI radio room, so Pete wasn't sure she heard George Sullivan correctly.
Repeat, please.
She said. The other agents heard as well. There was panic in Sullivan's voice as he announced the number for agent in trouble.
Code 67, code 67 to 133 Yuma Street Southeast. We need an ambulance. Police, right away.
His voice choked back tears.
There's been a shooting. Please, hurry.
One would never guess that George had only known both men for just 2 months. He spoke with the grieved emotion of a brother. Pete fell off her chair in shock. Sullivan did not broadcast names, but she knew exactly who was at that location. Pete regrouped and calmly answered back.
We've got ambulances coming. Hold on.
11:56 a.m.
Glover was at the office waiting for a no-show Edwin, who was never late. He reached out to him over the radio at 11:45, but Edwin was not in his car. Then news of the bank robbery began pouring in. He realized that their lunch date would have to wait because Edwin was definitely out on the call.
11:57 a.m.
Ella was into her daily routine, listening to the television while she cleaned the apartment. She turned off the vacuum and heard the phone ringing. Hello? Ella had the phone cradled in the side of her neck while she wrapped the vacuum cord. It was Goldie Johnson on the other end, whose trembling voice sounded frightened.
Ella, I I need you to.
Goldie's voice became inaudible. Goldie, what's wrong? Ella said.
I just heard on the radio that 2 MPD detectives were shot, and nobody will tell me if my husband is all right.
Oh my God, Ella said. All right, Goldie, calm down. I'll call Woody and see if he knows anything. Try not to worry. I'll call you back.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you so much.
Goldie sounded relieved for her friend's offer to help.
11:59 a.m.
Ella's call to her husband at the WFO went unanswered 2 times, so she settled for leaving him a message with the bureau switchboard operator. When she couldn't reach him a 3rd time, she decided to phone Glover, who was doing paperwork at his desk.
John, it's Ella. Where is everybody today?
Hi, Ella.
Glover said.
Busy day today.
Have you seen my husband?
I saw Woody earlier. I plan to catch up with him later today.
Ella assumed he meant at the basketball game.
I got a call from my hairdresser. Her husband is a police officer, and she heard about some shooting. She couldn't reach him, so I told her I would call Woody and try to get some information for her.
I'll see what I can find out.
Glover said. He knew that Edwin was out on the bank robbery call and wouldn't be able to return Ella's phone call for a while.
Please, John.
Ella said.
Goldie is fit to be tied. I'll wait to hear from you.
All right. I will talk to you later.
John said.
Thanks.
Ella gave a final request.
And have my husband call me.
I will.
John hung up the phone and began to monitor the ongoing events to see if he could find out the names of the MPD officers. Ella could not shake the feeling that something was off this morning. Maybe it started with her husband rushing off, but she shrugged it off and resumed her cleaning. She needed to wipe those darn fingerprints off the balcony glass again.
12 o'clock p.m.
Willie Rabina Bryant found herself in a war zone outside her door. "Let me go," she screamed. "I need to go inside." She was hysterical. George Sullivan held her back, thinking Bryant was still inside, armed and extremely dangerous. Another older woman, who had also placed an urgent call to MPD while Sullivan was alerting the radio room from his car, emerged from her apartment with a white sheet and circled it around Edwin's head. She was afraid to touch him. A crimson pool poured from the top of his body, with bits of bloody pulp matter lying near the back of his skull. Willie Bryant's attention turned to the fallen agents, fading her hysteria. The older woman returned to her apartment for a few moments. Willie knelt down to assist in caring for Edwin while Sullivan attempted to make Palmisano as comfortable as possible until help arrived. The old woman returned a 2nd time with a pillow, which Sullivan placed under Anthony's head. Palmisano's .38 caliber service revolver was lying at his side. George picked up the weapon and put it in his coat pocket as the FBI and MPD arrived on the scene.
12:01 p.m.
Special Agent Walter Thomas showed up at the location precisely 1 minute after hearing that two agents had been shot. He was in car 620 at Benning Road and 21st Street in Northeast D.C. when the robbery call came over the radio about 11:30 that morning, then received the update alleging the suspect was Billy Austin Bryant. Two other units responded with S.A. Thomas that they would check out the address at Yuma Street. Thomas arrived at the same time a uniformed MPD patrol officer came on the scene, and together they proceeded to the top of the now crowded stairs. Two additional MPD units, sirens blaring, screeched to a halt in the middle of the block, while several FBI cars, fire and rescue, and an ambulance passed through the barricade and onto the street. Thomas stood paralyzed for a brief moment, staring at the two men on the ground. He had only seen the images before him in his Fundamentals of Criminology textbook and Quantico training materials. Up close was surreal and very different, a sight that would stay with Thomas for the rest of his life. Lying face up was Edwin, the agent first to fall, feet pointing toward the doorway of Willie Bryant. S.A. Thomas observed that a bullet had entered the left side of his cheek. Considerable swelling and blood covered the right side of his face. He determined immediately that Edwin had suffered massive head wounds and was losing a great deal of blood. He lowered himself and reached for Edwin's wrist. The pulse was faint and getting weaker each second. Thomas called out to the medical team who were carrying stretchers up the stairs to hurry. Special Agent Chuck Harvey, another agent from the WFO, arrived seconds before the medics and without hesitation began nonstop CPR until the paramedics reached the third-floor landing. Lying face up was Anthony Palmisano, his feet pointing near the apartment next door. His head was slightly crooked toward his right shoulder. A bullet had apparently entered his body near his right arm. He was bleeding, but not as profusely as Edwin was. S.A. Thomas felt a weak pulse on Palmisano, but dared not move him until the paramedics arrived.
12:04 p.m.
4 medics secured Edwin and Anthony on scoop stretchers and carried them down the 3 flights of stairs and into the back of the emergency unit. Without hesitation, Agents Sullivan and Harvey jumped in with the wounded men, assisting with CPR while paramedics worked to hook up oxygen and monitor vital signs. Just a few minutes away on Southern Avenue in Northeast D.C., Caffritz Hospital was alerted, and the medical staff stood ready to receive the victims. Once Edwin and Tony were removed from the crime scene, MPD and FBI assessed the situation on Yuma Street with greater intensity. The door had been locked at apartment 12. There was a bullet hole about groin height in the doorway, but it did not penetrate the other side. Another bullet tore a gash in the door by an angled shot from the stairway side of the floor. Willie Bryant was growing increasingly agitated that Billy was inside. She was yelling at the police not to shoot up her apartment and had to be physically restrained when the MPD Civil Disturbance Unit arrived with tear gas. FBI and undercover agents in uniformed police, equipped with helmets and flak jackets, surrounded the building from behind their cars with rifles and revolvers trained toward 133 Yuma Street. A flock of news reporters and police photographers descended upon the scene to capture the terrifying moments on the street and the possible surrender of bank robber turned murderer Billy Austin Bryant. After MPD evacuated the building's residents, the CDU shot 5 canisters of tear gas into the apartment window, anticipating their suspect to flee from the building in seconds. Nothing happened.
12:08 p.m.
The ambulance arrived at Caffritz Hospital. Feverish efforts to revive both agents continued along the way. Medical staff rushed Edwin and Anthony into the trauma unit for emergency medical treatment. Back at apartment 12, Willie Bryant, who had regained her senses and knew her children would be home from school soon, thought it best to give her house key to police, giving them access to the residence and avoiding further damage. Before she could approach, MPD officers rushed the stairwell and broke down her door with an axe. Guns drawn high and low as hyper-vigilant police wearing masks to protect against the tear gas stepped into the apartment. As the tear gas vapors dissipated, police darted in and out of the bedrooms, bathroom, and closets, looking for Bryant until one officer took note of an odd sight in the kitchen. It was January and it was freezing, but the rear window, the one facing the adjacent vacant lot and looking into a wooded area, was open.
12:10 p.m.
Edwin and Tony's injuries were critical. The Assumption Rectory sent their priest, Father Swift, to administer the last rites to both agents, to purify their souls and prepare them to enter the kingdom of heaven. He was too late. Father Swift, eyes downcast and black cassock dramatically flowing backward with each step, exited the trauma room in silence. He was accompanied by two surgeons and the coroner, Dr. Richard Welton, who delivered the reports that Agents Sullivan, Harvey, and the others who had gathered were praying to God they would not hear. Nurses and orderlies scattered throughout the hallway heard a rumbling groan. They witnessed George Sullivan collapse into the chair and bury his face into trembling hands. 27-year-old Edwin Woodruff, just 2 weeks shy of his next birthday, and Anthony Palmisano, 26, were both pronounced dead. And Billy Austin Bryant was gone.